everyone. My name is Joanne Buick, and I'm president of the Red River Valley Asperger Autism Network. Welcome to our 4th monthly Lunch and Learn. Mary is cueing us in the background to speak louder because we can't get microphones in this room. So we're grateful to Prairie St. John's for providing the space and the lunch for us for our Lunch and Learn. We're going to have a brief introduction of today's topic, and then we will open the floor to questions to our panelists. If you prefer, you could write your question on a card, and then one of us will pick that up and we will read it aloud for you. The presentation will be videotaped. We're trying that out. We've had several requests to have the content of the presentations taped so that people could refer to them in the future. Our plan is to put them on a link on our website, which we are in the process of updating. If you would prefer not to speak your question aloud, just please put it on a card and we'll be happy to read that for you. We are going to limit the amount of time that we address any particular question because we want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity who would like to ask a question. You're welcome to stay after our lunch and our talk and speak individually with any of our board members or our panelists. So we have time that you can stay here in the room later on if you choose to. We're going to ask you to please fill out a feedback form that is at your place. It's very valuable information, and we do use that to improve our sessions. Our panelists are here, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Stroh, and I'm a school psychologist working as the autism specialist for the West Fargo School District.
And I'm Patty Cummings. I'm currently an assistant principal at Carrollton Middle School, and prior to that was the Asperger's teacher coach for the district. So, the Asperger teacher coach for the district. Gotta speak louder.
And I am John Fody. I myself have Asperger's and have presented speeches here before and have been a part of panels before, and I want to be able to share my experience with other people to help other people.
And my name is Margie Gray. I'm on the board of the Red River Valley Asperger Autism Network, and I will do a brief introduction to set up the topic today. We had a lot of feedback from previous sessions that folks really were interested in how to be effective in working with schools. And one of the things that we know is that we have these amazing people in our lives who are all at once a mystery, a challenge, maybe a little frustrating, and absolutely awesome in what they bring into our lives. And so it's really been recently that we've learned so much more, and so that parents and educators alike can work more effectively with kids on the spectrum, really understanding what the core issues are, what it is that's getting in their way of being successful, specifically at school. So we put together some ideas about just sort of an overview of how to get started and how important parents and educators are in working together. Okay, so. Okay, here we go. So, the first thing is that even before you meet with the school, there are some things that you can do to make your meetings as effective as possible. And you have this PowerPoint presentation on the table in front of you if you want to make notes or refer to it at any time. So before meetings, if the school has called a meeting with you, as a parent, it's not unreasonable to ask, well, what's the agenda? What is it that we want to accomplish in this meeting, so that everybody goes in with the same idea of what the goal is for the meeting, And if there are some things going on that you want to be able to discuss, letting them know that ahead of time can be really useful in terms of the planning process. If it is a parent who calls the meeting, and my slides, I apologize to those of you in the audience who are educators, my slides are addressed from the perspective of a parent talking to the education system. So anyway, if you're going to call a meeting, it's important that you know what you want to accomplish. And even if it's, your agenda, it doesn't have to be some formal big deal, but just dropping an email to the school organizer saying, these are my concerns, so that everybody can come prepared to the meeting to really talk about the things that you're seeing, the concerns that you have. It's not unreasonable, especially if you're new to the diagnosis, consult with the therapist you're working with. An experienced parent can be a good resource for understanding how to approach things. And even getting an advocate involved, there are resources locally. These are two that I was aware of, Freedom Resource and Protection and Advocacy, that can help you to focus your discussion and to know, give you an idea of what direction to work from. And if you feel insecure about your contributions as a parent, know, number one, that what you bring to the table is every bit as valuable as what the educators that you may look to as experts bring to the table. Your input is very important, and you need to feel empowered in knowing that. But if it helps for you to have an advocate come with you to be a source of ideas, that's not a negative thing. And my only feedback would be, or my suggestion would be, if you do bring an advocate, set it up in the meeting and let the folks you're working with know, because there can be a perception, oh, they're unhappy with what we're doing and so they're calling in this outside person. Assure them that you're just looking to have the best possible set of ideas, the most well-rounded ideas come to the table, and that's why that person's there. It's not necessarily that there's an issue or a problem that they are refusing to address. It's just one that hasn't been addressed yet, okay? All right, so starting with the positive, that's, it's something that we talk about. We want to hear the positive about what's going on with our kids. Well, talk about the positive that's going on with the school as well. And sometimes it may not seem like there's anything positive going on. If you're getting calls on a daily basis or even a weekly basis that your child is melting down again, you need to come get them, things like that, it can be difficult to find the positives. But look at it from the perspective of, at the very basic level, we all want what's best for this child, right? That's a positive. So starting out with, I know that we're all here in support of this child, is an important place to start. And then to talk about, are there any positives going on with the child? And even when it seems like a negative, I know we went into a meeting one time and my son was refusing to go to social group. He begged me, he said, do I have to go to social group anymore? Well, that's a positive. He's advocating for himself. He's telling me that there's something going on there that really isn't working for him. And so that can be looked at as a positive, even if it seems like a negative. He's refusing to go to social group. And I want to make it clear that the slides are here as sort of a tickler to start the conversation. They're by no means comprehensive. I'm sure that you all have examples that you could add to this that would be just as valuable as anything that we have up here, okay? So when the next step in that process is identifying what it is that we need to be working on. What is the issue? What's the obstacle in this particular situation? And that's where the real detective work comes in. And it takes a lot of brainstorming. I wrote down, I just listed a bunch of lagging skills. These are straight from Ross Green's work with collaborative problem solving. It's important to know what the obstacle is in order to be able to address it. If someone is having meltdowns every day and you don't know what's causing the meltdowns, it's hard to reduce the number of meltdowns. The next step would be brainstorming interventions. When you think you've gotten to a point where you're not sure, because it is all detective work, but there's a high probability that this is what's going on with the child. At the very least, or even if you haven't gotten to that point yet, it's important to reduce the number of serious escalations, right? I think that's our number one goal as parents and educators, is we want to make sure everybody's safe, number one. And brainstorming those interventions is going to require starting to identify what are the things that are leading up to the meltdown or the behavior. And how can we, if we see that, with my son, it was always the minute he started flying his pencil through the air, we knew we were headed down a path that was not going to end well unless we intervened, right? So that his paraprofessional was able to identify that behavior as being something that almost always happened before a meltdown. Now, a meltdown didn't always happen after that, but she knew that that was the first sign and that we needed to intervene. And if you can intervene at those early stages, whether it's delivering a stack of books to the library to get that heavy sensory input, delivering a note to the office just to get the walking away from whatever it is that's the stressor. Working with the parent for strategies to add a sensory break or some sort of an activity that would help the child to refocus and reground. Identifying a safe place for the student to go when they're stressed so that when they can start to self-identify when they're starting to get stressed or their anxiety level is starting to go up, then that would be an important thing for them to have, is that type of escape route. A pass to leave the classroom when they're overwhelmed, and the strategy that goes along with what happens when they leave the classroom. These are just a few things that I've either heard or that we've used personally. But the list of interventions is probably infinite, and it's really going to be about you and your team working together to figure out what's going to work the best for your child to really sort of interrupt that cycle of meltdowns if that's what's going on for you at school. Longer term, you want to plan for teaching and supporting those lagging skills. And I'll give you an example of something that we did with my son. So math is a non-preferred activity for him. He's really good at it, but he does not like sitting down and doing math. So probably 3 years ago, we started with the strategy that he had the option to read instead of doing math if he couldn't do math right then. He could read instead, and then he knew that he would do his math with his special ed teacher, his case manager, in the resource room later. And they would use different strategies to get through the math. He also had the option to take a quick break. Just by going to the water fountain and getting a drink, it gave him that, the sensory input of walking to the fountain. He got to walk away from it for a minute, get his head together, get a drink of water, come back, and when he came back then, a lot of times he was able to do the math. And then he had the other option of he could work on math now with the case manager in the resource room if he didn't feel like he could do it in the classroom. So the learning that's taken place is that he's learning that there are multiple options to solve this situation. So he's learning to be flexible in his thinking. He's learning self-advocacy because he got to decide, can I do math right now Or am I not able to do math right now? And he got to learn strategies for managing his anxiety. So we started building those skills that he was lacking in being able to sit down and just go to math, right? And what's happened, the good news out of all this, we had parent-teacher conferences this week, and he's gone from the beginning of the year where I think 27% of his assignments were modified to, at this point, his teacher is only modifying about 11% of his assignments. Out of 18 assignments so far this quarter, he's only had to have 2 modified. And I am firmly convinced that a lot of it has to do with these type of strategies that we gave him to learn how to manage the stress, advocate for himself, and to get to a point where he had that mental stamina to sit down and do it. So building whatever it is that you've come up with into the IEP, I think is essential, because it makes it extremely clear for everyone involved exactly what the expectations are. And the key to building it into the IEP is you don't want it to be inflexible in terms of, my son hated, he was having problems at recess. So we wanted to give him the option to stay in the resource room and play on the computer during recess if he felt it was a day that he couldn't handle the unstructured sensory overload of the playground. But we didn't want him to be barred from going to the playground. So the language he used was that he had the option to stay in if it was a day he didn't feel he could manage that sensory input. And we came up with some other things with his teams in terms of when that would be decided, right? And so that it wasn't just this flipping back and forth all the time. It was teaching him to make decisions, to understand where he was, and to be able to then advocate for himself one way or the other, which was going to work for him that day. Functional behavioral assessment, or functional behavior assessment, I've seen it both ways. This is a really important piece of this whole process of identifying, especially if you're having problems at school, right? I mean, none of this is necessary if there are no problems. So the schools collect data, and they're going to be able to tell you, there were this many incidents. They happened on these days. They're going to be able to give you that kind of data. As a parent, coming to the table with some data of your own can be really helpful. You can start to figure out when it's that, let's see, there were changes in his team today, that he struggled, that he managed to hold it together all day, but when he got home, he completely fell apart, right? You can start to identify what are the situations during his day that are going to be triggers for your child. And then the PBI, Positive Behavior Intervention Plan, or Behavior Intervention Plan, depending on your school's terminology. So there are, as part of this behavior intervention plan, there are interventions, and then there are what I call crisis response. In our BIP, it was called conditional procedure. And when we're so focused on, if there's a really extreme behavior going on, we can be really focused on what do we do about the behavior, right? So are we going to put him in a hold? Are we, how are we going to keep everybody safe? Those kinds of things. So we can lose sight of the preventive part of this whole process if we're not careful. The functional behavioral assessment is going to give you a lot of clues to understand what you're looking for, what it is that's causing the behavior. And then the other piece to the BIP that I think is important to be conscious of and aware of as a parent is making sure that you define what constitutes a danger to self or others, or what is an emergency situation. Because sometimes those terms are used in a behavior intervention plan, and everybody needs to be on the same page as to what that looks like you're not going to know in every situation, but you need to be on the same page as to, is it that he kicked the back of somebody's shoe? Or is it that he had somebody on the ground pounding them? And I'm using he a lot because my experience is with a boy. So those of you who have girls, please, I apologize for not being more inclusive. Now, when I said it's easy to become focused on it's easy to become focused or lose sight of the preventive part. So when we got our behavior intervention plan, when we were going through this process at one point, there was a lot of time spent describing what would happen if you were in one of those conditional response situations. And there were about 2 sentences in the intervention piece. And I went back to the school and I said, I want all this stuff that we've talked about included in his intervention plan, because that is more important than what happens if he melts down. Because speaking from our experience, once we had our BIP in place, they never had to use the conditional procedure. And I'm convinced because we spent so much time up front on the interventions. And I went into a lot of detail. I'm not going to go through these. These are directly from our intervention plan. But I wanted to make sure that the focus is on prevention when we went into that process. So the bottom line is that when you're working with your school, you're building a team, and you all want what's best for the child. And it's important that you know that you do have legal rights in the situation. And if you're not aware of those rights, it's important that you be aware of them. We want to work collaboratively and supportively with our schools. And in order to do that, we have to know what our rights are. So these are just some other suggestions for how you can get clarity on what those rights are. And at this point, I would open it up to, are there any questions immediately from the audience as to what you're experiencing or?
Lisa?
I have a question.
Let me just repeat that in
Oh, sorry.
concise form so everybody is sure that they hear it. Your question is what kinds of options might be available for your child in the public kindergarten as opposed to the other school that you're looking at, and that this information would help you in a decision process.
Yep, and I already contacted the principal, and she said that I may not even have a para for him. So if that's the case, why not keep him in the private school where it's 12 to 15 kids and I bring in my own resources?
So your question is what kinds of resources
Yeah.
might be available? Can you address that, Pat?
And there's no guarantee, but he does have it.
Mhm. Well, the first thing I'd like to say, and I understand the parent thing. You have to know as an individual outside of the school, I have my own child with a significant disability, and she's autistic. So I understand the parent part. In my professional experience, para does not equate smooth running and everything's glory. And yeah, I understand theoretically why that's the first thing that comes to our mind, because somebody's there and guiding and watching, and it helps our adult parent minds feel more at ease. Typically, then you're looking at the least educated person working the most with your child. Do you know what I mean? So I would invest more time with concern over who's the educator working with my child than concern whether there's an individual walking alongside my child. Does that make sense? So to not let that fear of no para make it feel like there's no support. There can be a lot of support without a one-on-one para. And then there's always that discovery period of what does a child need, what doesn't a child need, when do they need it, when do they not need it. Because you certainly don't want your child to become dependent upon somebody else to cue them throughout the day, even as a 5-year-old. Kindergarten's designed for young kids, so it's not like we're putting 5-year-olds with 25-year-olds. So, absolutely, sir.
When I was in kindergarten myself, I was in the main classroom for part of the day. and then they would take me into another room for more individual one-on-one with another instructor at times as well to help to manage the day. So it'd be also intervening. So first part of the day in the normal classroom, working with the other children, doing the normal things that the kindergarten class would do. Then a one-on-one time with somebody else, and then I would go back to the kindergarten class, and then they would have another one-on-one session in there. They had that built in, and that was able to manage stress and manage also even more personalized learning, and I found it to be very helpful. So that is an option that I know from my experience doesn't exist, because it was in existence when I was in kindergarten, and that was back in '93.
I just want to tell you too, my youngest son has Asperger's and mental illness, and we didn't want him to start kindergarten either, same feelings. I actually didn't start him until he was 6, and he went to private school before that. But once we got him in, did the IEP, he did the one-on-one that you were speaking of. He had a beanbag chair in the classroom behind a partition that he could separate himself with a CD player and headphones, and he knew he could, if it got really bad, he had little tickets. He'd just put one on the teacher's desk, and he knew to go to the principal's office, and he would actually sit in her room and do whatever oh my God, it was such a relief from the private sector going into the public school at kindergarten. We had so much more help than I ever thought, and I'm really glad we did it. It's after you get out of elementary school that it becomes more of a problem and a challenge, but I found starting him in kindergarten, I kicked myself for waiting a year, because the public school offered so much more than the private school did.
And I do think that, the private schools can do in-service training for their teachers, and do that, so that you have, I think the key that each one of you has said is that having a teacher very aware and knowledgeable about what the child needs and how to look at him through his day.
Yeah, with a private school, they don't have to. Really?
No, they don't have to, but many do.
Yeah.
I'm a retired teacher myself, and we really do work hard and want to do what we can for our kids. And a lot of times, the blockade is just lack of enough knowledge and training. Yes?
I have a question kind of in regards to what you said, where we don't want our children to be reliant on cues throughout the day. I've got a 3-year-old that's in preschool, and he's very reliant on a visual schedule for everything across his movement throughout the entire school, other than 2 activities, washing his hands and brushing his teeth. Otherwise, he needs a visual schedule for everything. And I brought up that very same concern in his IEP meeting, saying, that makes me nervous. He bit the para when she didn't prompt him to use the visual schedule, and the teacher said, well, I didn't feel bad for her because she didn't use the visual schedule. And I was just like, eek. I'm like, if we're that reliant on it, that makes me a little bit nervous, and I'm worried about him being that dependent on it. And everybody's like, well, it works, so let's just continue with it, and because it works, and you should start instituting it more at home. But how do you deal with that as a parent when you kind of feel like everybody else in the room is saying, it works, Mom, so do what we're doing?
Right. And as a former speech path as well, I developed many visual schedules. And I will tell you that I'm so glad you asked that question. It's a matter of scaffolding. When I think of it as level, we do least restrictive environment. That's to say, our child in an environment should be in the place where they're least restricted. We can also look at some of the supports that we put in as being least restrictive. But I do believe that children need to learn how to be weaned away, and there is an art and a science to that. In comparison to the para, I am would be more happy to see somebody using a visual schedule, because that is more likely to transfer to their own advocacy as opposed to inadvertent niceness of an individual, a para, not even realizing how much they're cueing a child, how much they're doing, how much they're anticipating, and sometimes even speaking for, because they become such a close network, which is very nice in a lot of ways, can actually start to be a little detrimental and a little hard to pull away from that way. So visual schedule, that to me is something that your children could learn to use independently eventually. So I think that's where your team might be coming from. Now, as far as the parent not following that, well, you know, maybe not in terms of if it's that close, that much needed, they might want to look at how dependent, but yeah.
Or look at just fading. You said that a couple of the routines your child knows pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
So
Brushing,
fading the parent
Mm-hmm.
from those routines and seeing if your child can just use the visual cues
Right.
to independently follow through on that routine.
Something, can I add something to that as a grandparent of an older child? We've had to come to grips in our family with the fact that he relies on cueing from us. Not across the board, he's extremely independent throughout the day, but he texts me near the end of the day when he's kind of at his, end of the road. And for a while it was simply, he texts me because mom can't accept texts. But it was just that security, like a security blanket. And then it has kind of shifted to, I realized just recently, problem solving. I'm cueing him through problem solving because he'll say, this is what's going on, so-and-so's being a jerk, he's making it hard for me. And then that's my opportunity to support the school the way they've set it up and say, have you talked to the para? Have you told the teacher? Go find your case manager, that kind of thing. And that, well, first of all, it makes the case manager a lot more comfortable with his texting me, that I'm urging him to use those tools at school. But I think that's a positive thing, that he's found some way to help somebody to help him at problem solving time, because his anxiety goes up and problem solving goes down. So in a way, right now it's positive. But I think that's something that we just have to keep back in our minds, in our toolbox for helping him, that cueing is a positive thing we can do for our kids. Mary?
When my son was younger, we used the picture schedule, the visuals, and I used him at home, we used him at school, and I've always had the mindset that I have to keep it consistent between the two. And as he got older and as he got more mature, we were able to scale back on how many of those individual things we had to use. But it is important to use a consistent method at home and at school. You can't do it one way at home and then expect him to go to school and do it, and vice versa. It's got to be the same.
It does depend. I mean, I agree. I think that's best case scenario. I do know individuals who, in different environments, set up different rules. And so it was okay if that schedule matched school and this schedule matched home. But you do have to be open to that flexibility. And in an IEP, the first word is individualized. And so I agree, your best case scenario is to start very uniform. But it's to never forget that you could, it's always a work in progress. You work with the child to find out. And you said it so well. You don't wake up in the morning wondering how you could ruin little Johnny's day. That's not the intent. Sometimes it's the outcome, unintentional as it may be. But I do love it when the team works together and you can come to this does work. The texting bit. This is what he's using it for. Usually in our school, with a phone, we see it, we hear it, we take it. Unless you're in Mrs. Cummings' skills class and you have Asperger's and you need to text your parents, but they understood that rule because it was set up beforehand. So then you also apply the rule to where can you do this at? And not forgetting that if you have a child in an IEP, there's the direct instruction as well, which is what you were referring to when you said you went into that other place. There's calming things, there's teaching taking place, there's learning taking place between the educator and the child as well in those. So it's not just about how we react to the child and how the child reacts to us. It's about teaching the child where, when, how, the expectations. So.
And back to your direct question, in preschool, it is a little difficult to try to pull that visual guide away right now. But personally, as you got older and you learned to be a little more self-dependent, you're able to kind of wean off of it a little bit. So I wouldn't be overly concerned about it right now. But when you do feel that you want to do this, do it very minutely. I'm talking very minutely. You don't want to take away something like that. That is going to create a meltdown. You have to do it very, very slowly and in very small increments if you do want to make them less anxious about going off of the visual cues. But remember though that the visual cues right now are beneficial, so keep that in mind as well.
Do we have another question?
I have a question regarding legal rights. I have an IEP coming up next Wednesday with my youngest son. And my youngest son is placed in a home with autistic children. He has 3 peers. And he has 24/7 with one-on-one, he has a one-on-one staff at all times because he has violent tendencies and stuff. But at school, we don't get that. And he's, you know, he's had real major incidents. And we're having this IEP, and I keep thinking, if the state agrees that my son should have one-on-one staff at 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, why is it when he goes to school we can't get that? They put him in the outreach program, and I kind of feel like he, you know, because he's in the outreach program, the special program, then they feel he doesn't have to have a one-on-one person. And my son can move very fast, and if he's mad, you know, it could endanger himself or somebody else. Can I ask for that? Because I asked for a para, but they were like, well, he's in the outreach program. And I've sat in that class, I volunteered in there, and there's another child who has more academic, I don't want to say mentally retarded, but closer to that the para seems to be with at all times. And so my son is alone a lot, and I worry about that, you know.
Jennifer, can you address that?
You can bring it up and there can be a discussion about it. I don't know your son or the program, so it's hard to know whether, I guess it comes down to whether he needs it at school. Is he having the physical outbursts at school? Does he need that constant one-on-one direction? Or is he following the schedule and structure in that setting?
At least once a week, we have a physical altercation. And this last time, it was very, you know, he took a pencil to another kid's throat. So to me, I think my son should have somebody sitting next to him at all times. And we already know as life goes on, he'll always be in a, you know, special group home and all that. So why does school have to be different?
If I could, you know what I would recommend is, again, you can ask,
Yeah.
and there's, you know, the question about why the state says one-on-one, why not the school. I'll tell you flat out, you may or may not like this answer, funding.
Oh, I know,
No, that's just one of them.
I
Yeah.
know.
And they set it up differently, and again, I mean, I feel so connected to this because I have a very similar situation. I felt there's different places for our children to learn different things. And schools are set up with educators who are taught in the field of what they're doing, and the more we go on in years, the more educators we have that do understand autism spectrum and Asperger's. And so that's different from the people who work with our children outside of the school setting. I don't know about yours, but some of my daughters one-on-one they're not trained individuals in terms of how to handle situations.
Are you talking about school or?
They're outside of school.
Now, see, his outside of school, they're
well, but-
oh my God, yeah, they know how to redirect, they know
Well,
exactly
right,
what
right.
his triggers are,
Right.
and they can see it coming.
And that's a seg into what my recommendation would be, is to ask for a functional behavior assessment. Because then what that determines is why you're really looking at what's triggering these meltdowns, what's triggering that physical outburst. And my other question for you would be, what are the results of those physical outbursts weekly at school? What happens?
Well,
What's
this
the
last
general
time,
plan?
for the first time, because he is in special programs, so this last time he actually got suspended. He's
Okay.
never been suspended.
Yeah,
And I didn't disagree with it.
yeah, no, I hear you.
But,
Yeah,
and maybe I'm wrong to say this, I hope I don't offend anybody, but my youngest son looks completely normal. And if you meet him, when you first meet him, you would think I was crazy what I was telling you right now. But
yeah.
he, he's bipolar, Asperger's, and we're talking schizoaffective disorder. And so he's, and I feel people even at the school don't get it, that he's.
Do you want to, I have I don't want to, we're talking. No, go ahead. We also have to keep in mind that the difference with the school setting and the life setting is the school, they have to meet specific goals as well. And I often told parents, if the kids aren't melting down with me, the specialist, then I'm probably not doing my job right. And you can, because when am I going to be able to teach that individual how to come back out of something that was a negative?
You're right.
When do you learn that? And I have suspended a child who was on and it's not the preferred method.
No, it
because that
isn't.
is not a learning method. That's a statement. That's a direction of reality, but that's not the training. The training comes when the child melts down. What do we have in place to help that child learn from that meltdown? What supports are there?
Well, he's been in programs since kindergarten, like I said, and he's actually very good now at getting back, getting control, breathing it out. It doesn't take days anymore. It takes half an hour to 2 hours, which may seem like a lot, but it's not. My problem is when it happens, yeah, he has learned how to turn it around, how to bring himself back, but when it happens, it's severe. And at the in the moment,
No, I'd like to suggest that what you had mentioned, that find out the function of behavior, what are the triggers, and then develop a plan and do as much preventive as possible. And the school will, they're on board with that. Schools want to do that kind of thing because that's where the teaching comes in. So, if you don't mind,
No,
we
that's
need to
fine.
move on. And someone else has another
I just wanted to ask, aren't there MA reimbursable services through the school district? I mean, other than para, is there a possibility for CTSS services or potentially PCA services in the schools?
So you said reimbursable?
MA reimbursable services?
There are some. Speech and language, OT, PT.
There's no possibility for PCA services or CTSS services?
Can you
in the
explain
school?
what those
It depends
mean?
on they're talking Minnesota right
Oh,
now,
right.
which are very different services.
Oh.
North Dakota
Yeah.
has
This is
PCSS,
referring to
and some of that.
services in Minnesota, which may not
right,
be
and I know what you're talking about in Minnesota.
We very much build back for PT, OT, speech.
Okay.
The others are within the budget. So I'll give you an example I learned today. Our paraprofessional budget, 5 million, is at 6 million. When the money's there, it's there, and when it's gone, it's gone. It's not like there's a stack waiting just in case. So budgeting is a very huge thing. Not that
No,
stops the
I,
process, but I think once you have that functional behavior assessment and they determine what's needed, it very much could be that it might need that in order to accommodate that, it would be a paraprofessional, and it might be something else. It just depends on what they find.
Is that all? Thank you, Mary.
I have a question.
Yes, Barb.
Well, first of all, a statement, because we have lots of other folks, school folks in the audience, and like, would you guys raise your hand?
Raise your hand if you're a school person.
Because
Thank
I
you
was-
for coming. Thank you for being here.
And that's the reason that I did that, because I think that there's so many variabilities between school districts, and we have Fargo and West Fargo represented here, and I just need to really give my very sincere thank you, because I think I've worked with everybody in the audience here, and the fact that you're here just speaks to why your districts do so well. But I do have a question too, because a lot of the things that I hear is that kids struggle at home, right? Kids are melting down at home, and parents are feeling frustrated, and they, well, things are great at school. We don't see it at school. We don't know what you're talking about. Oftentimes implying that then there's parenting, which builds a little shame and guilt into all of that. And sometimes the question then is, are they just working so hard at school that they're just done by the end of the day? And what's going on, and even sharing some of those ideas of things that are happening at school that are successful, how those can be translated. So what's a good way for parents to be able to communicate with the school about, you know what, I'm struggling, and I really don't think it's me. I think there's something else going on, to work together to try to come up with an answer for that, so there's consistency across the day.
If I could just paraphrase that briefly.
Good luck.
What kinds of things can parents do to work with schools so that we can have some more consistency between school and home, particularly on the days when they do well at school yet fall apart at home? What are some problem-solving things we can engage in? Seven?
Okay, good enough.
I think that students that I've worked with, in my experience, where we have the most luck with bridging that homeschool gap is just having a lot of open communication between the school staff or team and the parents, because we don't know what's going on at home from a school stance. We don't know what's going on at home unless parents are sharing that with us. Or occasionally students share things with us too. But so we can't address it if we don't know about it. So making sure that you have open lines of communication, and that there are people on the team that you feel comfortable speaking with, and seeking those people out if you are nervous about, can you talk to your case manager, or if you're more comfortable talking to the school psychologist or the counselor, talking to them like in a one-on-one rather than in like a big IEP team meeting. Seeking them out and letting them, advocate for you too, or assist you with navigating those pieces, I think can be helpful. We certainly have students that hold it together really well at school, and they just lose it when they go home because they didn't want their peers to see them freak out, or they didn't, they want to keep it together. They don't want something embarrassing to happen at school, and they get home and it's safe and they're done. And just those behaviors come out, and the waterworks come on, or however they express it. So we just try to work as a system together as best we can.
Isn't it important for people in school to be aware of that? That, they did well, because that's a positive.
Yes.
Yeah.
But at what price?
Yes.
And so then we can start developing something that can lessen some of that stress.
Yeah.
So that it's a smoother.
Right, because we can put in adaptations.
John?
I'd like to add in to their personal experience. In the 9th grade, I had a very similar thing. Beginning of the school year, first few weeks, absolutely stressed out by what's going on in the school. I'm holding together a school. She nailed it right on the head, because I didn't want an embarrassing meltdown at school. But when I got home, everything that just happened, I just fell apart. And this was happening day after day after day after day. And so my parents, all of my teachers, the principal, my caseworker, and myself all had a meeting about why this is happening, what's going on here, and we were able to find that it was certain classes that was doing that, and sometimes even a teacher that might not be very aware of what Asperger's was all about. And we worked to get some teachers more involved with that and learning the signs. And then this was helpful for me, might not be for everybody, but we did cut out 2 classes in which was giving me the most problems, and I would then take an equivalency class of that later with a different instructor, and that personally helped it. So we were able to both communicate with a lot of the teachers about what we can do to improve it, and then for the extreme cases, just cut out a couple of classes just to prevent that super stress meltdown result. And that was, it was good that we were able to work on that, because I was going through what Barb was saying back there with, you're holding it together at school, you're falling apart at home. That's not a parenting problem. It's just that you reached your absolute limit at school and you just cannot hold yourself together anymore.
I would also add that as parents, don't underestimate your power of being an educator for educators as well. If, for like Barb, you had said, you know, the implication is I'm not parenting correct. From my standpoint, if I ever as an educator gave that impression, I can tell you it would have been inadvertent. It just wouldn't have been what I was trying to imply at all. So then I would hope a parent could say, you know, I'm sorry, but when you say that, it makes me feel like you're suggesting that I'm not parenting at home right. I would suggest putting it out there on the table. Because first of all, those who don't mean that will say, oh my gosh, that's not what I meant. Those that did mean it need to be taught. So you're not harming either way. You're really not. And you know, the other thing is, and I work with training and you work with training teachers. Teachers are people too, and they can have emotions as well. And sometimes I think we as parents, any parent, child, a regular education child, a child with an IEP, it's your heartstrings that are being pulled. And the teachers care about kids, but they're not the heartstrings. And so we all, if we don't know, in the brain, anger and scared are very close when those emotions hit. And so things can come out sounding maybe not the way you want them to. And as human beings, we need to step back and say, sometimes, oh, I didn't mean it to sound that way. I didn't mean to imply that. So you can teach teachers as well. They, you know, I thought out this line, they're as afraid of you as you are of them. I mean, nobody wants to be wrong. You know, nobody wants to come wrong.
Well, if I could add on to this, you made a very important point, I think, when you said, Jennifer, that you need to find someone you're comfortable speaking with. If you're not comfortable in the big group, find at least one person you can talk to. This just recently happened to me, which surprised me because I feel pretty confident walking into an IEP meeting or any teacher meeting since I've sat on both sides of that table. But it's my grandson, you know, and it's so close to the heart. I didn't feel like I had been really heard well at a last meeting that I was at. It wasn't an IEP, it was just a gathering and an informal functional behavior analysis. And I felt like my insight was sort of swept away as, oh no, that's not right. Every ninth grader's tired at the end of the day. Oh, I knew there was more to it than that, you know. So anyway, I thought, you know, rather than go home and stew about this, I called up the case manager and I said, I just really want to talk a little bit face to face about this, and like over a cup of coffee. And so we met early in the morning of the school day when she had some time, and we just talked. And I started it with, we are much closer together than we're far apart. And these are just some things that I'm concerned about. And that was it. And we were very much the same in how we viewed things. And so just that personal interaction, I think, can be helpful, particularly if you feel a little kind of overwhelmed by the whole process. Yes, ma'am.
How do you handle
child being bullied or picked on when the other students in the room know why your child is leaving the room to go to a resource room or to go to get special one-on-one help? He's taken out of the classroom several times a day, so the other students decide they're going to bully that child. How do you handle that in school?
I've been a part of doing it different ways. As a case manager, I would often call the parent, or if we were talking because the parent's telling me about this, I went in and talked to the class. And of course, we're not going to do that without permission of the parent. It's a family rights and privacy. So we're not just going to go, as much as we may want to as workers, and just say, oh, by the way, class, I'm going to tell you about Johnny. But that has been one of the more effective ways. And of course, every teacher who does that is teaching at the level that they know, the developmental level. I myself worked with adolescents, so my conversation was geared toward adolescents. I wouldn't have that exact same conversation if I worked in the elementary. But there are some ways of dealing with that. And there's also the old standby of explaining to the bully what the consequences are going to be if they continue, and going the administrative route with that as well. So one of my more effective ways was going in and talking. Children, make fun of what they don't know, and adolescents, they're trying to figure themselves out. They have very little time. They're very egocentric, so they're climbing a social ladder, and boy, even non-special ed kids aren't. There's no room for them either. Do you know what I mean? So.
I haven't been asked to speak at the secondary adolescent level, but I have gone into classrooms at the elementary level and read, a picture book about autism to the class, and then take questions. And of course, we get an okay from the parents of the children.
As an educator myself, I had primarily elementary, but one of the things that people worry about is, oh my gosh, you're going to give away some surprise secrets or something like that, or the other kids are going to think, how come he gets that accommodation and I don't? And my experience, personal experience with many, many children was they know already there's something different about this person. So if you put it out on the table, like you said, and then all that mystique goes away, and it's like, oh, okay. Anytime I asked a child, and I'm talking like 5th and 6th graders too, who can be really, like you said, very egocentric. They would go, oh, okay. And at the upper levels in middle school, my grandson had some very positive experiences from kids just understanding. And they would kind of take him, under their wing and say, oh, come on, Now that's not to say all the bullying stopped and the snide, nasty comments stopped. But that openness, I think, as long as, our child was very comfortable with it from a young age. Many kids aren't. So you'd have to deal with that too. But I find that the more information there is out there, the better people accommodate it. We have time for just...
Can I just do, because I think that this has to be expanded out, that differences have to be accepted. And I go to too many school meetings where very well-meaning teachers say, well, we want him to be just like everybody else. And that's not okay. Who wants to be like everybody else?
Could you define that for me?
That's kind of where I come from too.
Yeah.
But I think it's a culture to build in each school that differences are great. Weird is a compliment, I think. I mean, if somebody calls me weird, it's like, hallelujah. You're seeing me as an independent, different thinking person. So I think just instilling that in kids, that it's great, and that, developmentally really doesn't come until high school, where there's some value in being different, but to really, again, in elementary schools and preschools, to build that culture of this is cool that you're different, and everybody's different. No two people are the same. So I just think the more that we can start that and do that within our families and neighborhoods. Sorry, I just...
Thank you. No, I think it's a very nice way to end this discussion right now. We've run out of time for our formal presentation. Please feel welcome to stay and chat with each other or with our panelists on the side. And thank you so much.
So this panel has to go.
This panel has gone. Well, thank you so much for letting me share.
Could I make one comment? I was a special ed person. Do the teachers' aides who are going to work with kids with Asperger's and autism, do they get special training?
They get training.
Huh?
They get training.